We don't talk enough about menopause in our society. Medically, menopause is just a day, one single day a year after those of us born with a womb have stopped our bleed. What no one told me when I was younger is that perimenopause, the lead up to this solitary, magnificent day, can last as long as 10 years. And it can take up to another 10 years for symptoms to pass after menopause. That's potentially 20 years to be affected by this. And yet, society as a whole doesn't talk about it. We hear mutterings about the change, but no indication of how long this change might take, or what's on the other side. Towards the beginning of my journey with perimenopause, I attended a workshop where someone said to me, "All your miscarriages come up to be honoured in this time," which I was curious about. I felt I'd done a good job of honouring all of mine. What I did not realise was underneath this message, there was so much more. For some, for sure, it passes unnoticed, and yet there are also those of us that during this time of perimenopause, everything we have tried to bury in our lives comes up to be looked at, worked through, and honoured. Woo! Yeah. And what might some of the symptoms of this perimenopause unravelling be? Yes, there can be physical symptoms, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, unable to get back to sleep because a dream has flicked a switch on the body thermostat. Our once regular bleed cycle become highly unpredictable. But no, I'm talking about another layer of this journey entirely. Things such as connecting to the bubbling inferno of rage within me. That I was told for so long was not appropriate, that I was hit or yelled at for expressing. Finding a somatic connection to the shame I felt when someone touched my clitoris for the first time, having had no prior recollection of that shame until my body revealed it. Who am I now after I've known that about myself? There's the deep layers of grief that continue to unpeel like a never-ending onion, catching me unexpectedly and without warning. And the grief comes not just from lives lost, but from the lives that I didn't get to have. What versions of self could have emerged if my parents had worked through more of their wounding? Discovering I could hold the dual awareness of they did what they could to the absolute best of their abilities, and what if things had been different, has been a game changer and allows the grief of what could have been to flow without shame or guilt. There's this sprawling landscape of times I felt I couldn't say no, the subtle and the not so subtle, the personal and the collective. The pain in my body showing me it's time to say no more. No more sex I do not want, no more eating foods my body cannot tolerate, no more wearing clothes that piss me off. Just because someone says I need to show up in a certain way and these clothes will make me look the part. Perimenopause is a journey in being done with performing. And with a diagnosis of ADHD and or autism, this experience can be magnified. 50 to 70% of people who are diagnosed autistic also have ADHD. That's a lot of comorbidity and a greater chance of having CPTSD. But is it trauma? Is it ADHD? A lot of the traits we associate with neurodivergence are actually trauma responses. Neurodivergent folk collect more trauma to begin with, particularly perhaps if we have non-understanding parents who just want us to be normal, or schooling that tries to jam us into neat little boxes. In fact, perimenopause can be a time in many women's lives where they start to seek a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or both. Where previously the hormone levels have been high enough to mask the symptoms of neurodivergence, now as they are falling, it becomes impossible to do so. Masking is also a term used specifically to describe the camouflaging that occurs with neurodivergence. It's what makes people of all genders likely to be diagnosed, less likely to be diagnosed appropriately as they try and fit in. And it looks different for different genders and flavours of neurodivergence. With autism, girls are stereotypically more likely to mask than boys. They will study their peers and mimic them. But they're not being their authentic selves and might struggle to understand why it is that doing things the same way as their peers doesn't get them the same results. And this masking becomes such an ingrained habit that they lose sight of their own identity. With ADHD, while the classic version of ADHD is hyperactivity and impulsivity, such as not being able to stay seated in class, the inattentive variety of ADHD is more internal and can involve staring out of the window for hours. It's also possible to have both. So neurodivergent challenges can show up in relationships in ways such as overwhelming emotions, where a partner may feel they are walking on eggshells to avoid an outburst, zoning out in conversations, forgetting important details, different organisational skills. You may need visual cues, multiple alarms, more structure, feeling like your partner is micromanaging you, which can come from a lack of understanding over how to support you with this. There might be feelings of shame, of being afraid to fail yet again. There might be a need for things to always be the same, or always changing. You might be a sensory seeker or a sensory avoider, and this applies to sex too. Consequences of masking, of hiding these versions of ourselves, can include perfectionism, low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, trouble differentiating between what's real and what's an act, feeling burned out, anxious, feeling tense around people, and importantly, it can lead to complications or delays with getting a diagnosis. It's also important to recognise that trans men experience an estrogen and progesterone drop as they transition hormonally, which can be at a much younger age. So this journey for trans men comes at a time when they are also working through aspects such as gender dysphoria, internalised transphobia, navigating a new identity, and being misgendered. It's a lot. The first symptoms I had of perimenopause were a craving for soya products, my bleed suddenly getting lighter, and a need to leave married life. So, as you might imagine, for me, the last few years have been quite the overhaul. I've been conscious I've been in perimenopause for a number of years, and yet my hormone levels were still declared within the normal range. Finally, I've been able to access HRT recently, and oh my word, it was like I had been transported back 7 years. I stopped feeling everything as intensely. I actually thought I'd stopped feeling completely for a while until I got more used to the subtler levels of emotion. I began to feel happy with the idea of domesticity again and mourning the loss of that life. It's no wonder those of us born with a womb are perceived to lose confidence when we hit puberty, if this is the sort of thing our hormones do to us. Then there's testosterone. Those of us born with a womb have enough testosterone to burn through about 20 minutes of pushing, driving things forward before we run out of tea and begin to access cortisol and adrenaline instead. Stress hormones, not good. This is one of the reasons why so many more folk assigned female at birth experience chronic illness. Pushing too hard and for too long makes us ill. And the testosterone we naturally have access to declines with age. It also declines with chemotherapy and a number of illnesses. So here's the thing, supplementing with extra testosterone can support us with our mental health, our bone health, our energy levels, our mood, our ability to concentrate, and yet the only way it can be prescribed on the NHS is if your libido has dropped. Which feels like another layer of patriarchal bullshit to the previously noted desire to fix asexuality that I mentioned in my previous talk here. And if any of this is resonating for you for the first time, or possibly the millionth time, know that it's never too late to seek support. This could be as simple as finding an online community that resonates for you, so you don't feel alone. It could be working with a coach. It could be seeking a diagnosis. Find what you need. You don't have to take this journey alone. And I nearly missed out on mentioning brain fog.
No.
I have discovered some positives. Brain fog allows for the possibility of living in the moment freely. To connect to what is real for us in this moment. And in this one. It allows us to be more fully present with our clients as they are right now, not projecting a past version of themselves onto their current truth. It also allows us to follow our inner guidance and trust where it is taking us. Our bodies know the way. This journey of perimenopause, with the right support, is a journey of becoming, of finding ourselves, of discovering who we were always meant to be.